So I want to say good afternoon and welcome to our live interview with our special guest who will be performing in our upcoming concert, An Ode to Music, Handel, Hendrix, and a Very Special House. I am Matthew Faulkner, the Executive Director for Musica Angelica, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's conversation. This afternoon, we'll start out with a brief overview to provide some context. I will then introduce each one of our special guests. Following that, I will ask each guest a couple of questions to get the conversation flowing. I have more questions as we need them, obviously. I want to share with everybody the broadcast, or the interview will be rebroadcast on our website. It's being recorded, and so you have another opportunity to watch the interview. We're also planning to publish a transcribed version of this interview so that our audience members can read all about it if they don't get to see it. And I would like to express a quick thank you to Dana White for his assistance with today's presentation. So let's fire away with our first guest is Gonzalo Ruiz, who is a founding member of Musica Angelica and has been its associate music director since 2014. For decades, he has been one of the world's foremost Baroque oboists, performing as a principal and a soloist with many of the world's top ensembles. He's a professor at the Juilliard School, and his students fill the ranks of the top groups across the country. Gonzalo is featured on dozens of recordings, has earned a Grammy nomination, and received the KQXR Record of the Year Award, as well as the ASCAP Award for Adventurous Programming. He has performed more works by Bach than any oboist in history. In recent years, he has concentrated on the guitar with a focus on jazz and rock. And welcome, Gonzalo. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Cynthia Roberts, who is one of America's leading period instrument violinists, appearing as a soloist, concertmaster, and a recitalist throughout North America, Europe, and Asia. She appears regularly with many of North America and Europe's most notable Baroque and early music orchestras. She is a faculty member of the Juilliard School and also teaches at the University of North Texas and the Oberlin Baroque Performance Institute, and has given master classes at a number of notable universities and institutions throughout the world. Cynthia was featured as a soloist and concertmaster on Touchstone Pictures' Casanova, and accompanied soprano Renee Fleming on Late Night with David Letterman. Her recording credits include Sony, CPO, and Deutsche Harmonia Mundi. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Maury Baker. Maury is a drummer, timpanist, and a composer with an illustrious classical, jazz, and rock and roll background. He comes from a showbiz family with his grandfather, grandmother, and father all having notable careers in the entertainment industry. In 1969, he toured with Janis Joplin, performing at Woodstock, Madison Square Garden, and several other large pop festivals. He has also appeared with Janis Joplin on The Dick Cavett Show, The Tom Jones Show, The Glenn Campbell Show, and The Music Scene. He has performed and recorded with a number of rock and roll icons, including Carlos Santana, Jackson Browne, Stephen Stills, Van Morrison, Judy Collins, and Jimi Hendrix. Maury composes music for film, TV, video games, and the internet. His music can be heard on national promos for CBS, including JAG, Nash Bridges, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and Walker, Texas Ranger. So we're delighted to welcome you, Maury. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so I want to start with a very quick introduction to the house. Many of you may not be familiar with this very special house. The house is actually a house in London's Mayfair district, located at 23 and 25 Brook Street. And George Friedrich Handel lived there from 1723 to 1759. Unfortunately, he also left us at the house. Jimi Hendrix lived there on and off from 1968 to 1970. They have now established a nonprofit, handelhendrix.org, that is investing over £3 million in restoring the basement and ground floor of the property. And we'll talk a little bit more about this famous house, but I want to start off with a question for Gonzalo to get the conversation going. And I'd love to hear, obviously, sort of what inspired the idea of a concert featuring Handel, Hendrix, and the house.
I have to say that it was in the air. It was in the zeitgeist. But the specific way, by the way, thank you for having us. And thank you for your introduction. I kind of feel like a big deal now. I have a chamber group here in New York called House of Time. And we were playing a benefit concert for the Handel House, which is now being renovated as the Handel Hendrix House. It used to be two separate admissions. If you went to London and you were doing the pilgrimage, you would have to pay 2 tickets. Now it's 1. And it became sort of a natural, obviously we have to play music that was composed in that house. How about throwing in a Hendrix encore? And that was the genesis of this concert, and it obviously needed to go further in that direction than what we did at the time. And it's basically exploiting a serendipitous event. One of the great improvisers of the late 1960s lived under the same roof as one of the great improvisers of the 1720s and 30s. And I have to say, I don't feel like I'm a crossover guy. In that I like all kinds of music, and I tend to go for its rootsier versions, in a sense. So I wanted to have actual Baroque music and actual rock and roll side by side. And then however they crossed over would be a natural outflow of that, rather than have a hybrid from the get-go. So I felt like we needed to have the electric continuo band on stage next to the strings. And that was the inspiration for this. I've like your introduction said, I've spent a lot of my time recently focusing on America's classical music, which is jazz and rock. There's a sort of classicizing process that happens when something really becomes part of the culture, and I believe that is certainly happening with jazz. Nobody will argue it there, and it is happening with rock music. Another of our founding members who will be on the stage with us is Stephen Schultz, the flutist, and he teaches at Carnegie Mellon, and he has an overflow class every year on Bach and the Beatles. Somehow he makes the course out of teaching the Beatles at Carnegie Mellon. Another one of our colleagues who has played with Musica Angelica in the past, Kate Van Orden, who teaches at Harvard now. She's a bassoonist, and she teaches a course on California 60s rock and roll at Harvard. And I would not be surprised at all if Maury wasn't featured on some of the class examples. That I have to take that as a wholesome kind of thing. And so we're embracing rock and roll in the context of Baroque music, based on this serendipitous thing that they both live.
So let me ask you, this is to dive a little deeper, because I think our audience is going to be very curious. It's like, people have been asking me, just so you know, what's this going to sound like? So what can the audience expect to hear? We can't tell you, but sort of what could they expect to hear? Could you tease a little bit about what they will possibly hear? And maybe the second part of that is, do you think that will influence their appetite for more of this kind of fusion of music?
I have no idea. I would hope that everybody will come with an open mind. Some people might come for just because Hendrix is somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I hope that they come away with a greater appreciation of Handel. And the people that are really skeptical of the Hendrix bit, I hope that they love it, which I think I don't know what else to tell you. What is it going to sound like? I can give you the rundown. The first half is easy to describe. It is Handel. It is the most beautiful Handel. It is peak Handel. And if you've been to Musica Angelica concerts, you've probably heard us play Handel, and it is very near and dear to my heart. And we're going to be combining music from two great works. One of them, sort of, the main character is dance.
Okay, good.
It is a work about dance that, of course, is made up of dance music. And the other one is a work about music with words by Dryden. And that is the Ode to Saint Cecilia. And it's a unbelievable piece that describes the birth of music and how it evolves. It kind of starts out from a big bang, like sort of a metaphor where music comes together from chaos. And then there's several arias that focus on the specific instruments, because this being the 17th century, the writing is pretty specific to the times then. But it's unbelievably beautiful music, and those are all the arias. So we have instrumental music from this piece that is about dance, and songs from this piece that is about music. Intermission. The second half, this is what happens in my mind. Jimi Hendrix and his band, wandering down the back stairway, walk through some kind of a wormhole in time and come across Handel and his musicians. They're playing Opus 6 in E minor. Hey, music is music. We're going to start kind of playing. You know, the first movement is really obvious. So I'm sure that if Jimi Hendrix and, you know, his milieu would drop in, they would, find the key and play those changes. The second movement, it's a little bit, stand back, let's see what happens here. The third movement is kind of like, that's where we find some real common ground, I think. That's where, you know, okay, if we're going to play together, this kind of music will do. At that point, Hendrix's musicians decide to take the lead, and that's where we'll place one Hendrix classic, go back to Handel. You know, we'll pass the ball back and forth. The next Handel movement is very much a jammy kind of piece where sort of, if I may get sort of technical for a second, the tonic chord can be dominant, which is basically what the blues is about. There can be, you know, if you had to nail down one American contribution to world music, is the dominant has a minor seventh. Also, we can argue about the third, but that's, and then we'll play one more Hendrix classic, and finish it off. So that's the conceit of the second half. So there's going to be actual Handel and actual Hendrix, and sorry I keep going on and on, but obviously that's going to involve electric instruments and drums. And I will say that while we have been speculating, and that's been part of our fuel for decades now, about how music sounded when Handel was alive, there's no need to speculate about what Hendrix sounded like.
Yeah, we know.
It's at our fingertips. If you have a phone, you can listen to Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. Obviously, I play guitar, and I sound like a faker when I try to imitate Hendrix. Certainly, you can copy the licks note by note, and we're not going to do that. and it's going to be great.
Well, that's fascinating, and it sounds to me, obviously, and you've touched on something I thought was really fascinating, and the concept of sort of two distinct genres kind of running into each other, and the interplay, and just kind of jamming and sort of feeling each other out musically to see where there's common ground. That sounds to me like a really exciting and kind of daring, musical adventure. And I think, I don't know, that gets me up on the edge of my seat. So hopefully it'll get some other folks up on the edge of their seat. So Cynthia, I want to swing over to you now, in kind of reading about this house and finding out that the Handel Hendrix project and the money that they're going to put into this particular home will also see live music performed in the rooms in which it was written. Handel composed a great deal of music in this house, and it was often first heard in these rooms too. And they'll also host concert masterclasses and exclusive private events, which sort of lends me to this question that fascinates me about a musical life is, how does the physical space, and it could be your home, it could be a rehearsal hall, concert hall, how does that physical space that you rehearse and perform in your mind, kind of inform the creative process?
Well, it's wonderful if you're in London. Actually, walk through the streets of London and go to this Handel house. I've been invited to perform there, and I couldn't work out the dates, but I will. Especially after the conversation, I'm going to follow up on it. So definitely for me, the physical space definitely has a lot to do with how we feel as musicians, our inspiration, and the audience too. It just gets everybody in the mood. And so I'm sure playing these pieces in Handel's house would be incredible, just because he was there. But we'll be in LA and Long Beach, and these are both great venues, and we're going to create the ambiance so that you get the Handel house at the beginning, and then Gonzalo will take over and Maury will create the Jimi Hendrix. So I think the audience, as long as we have it in our minds as musicians, I think it's going to be fun to create it. And what Gonzalo was talking about, rock band, if we're playing in a Baroque orchestra, small Baroque orchestra, Baroque band, the best moments are when it feels like we're playing in a rock band. The rhythm goes, everybody's loose, everything just goes, and you hear all the different voices and people are smiling at each other. They're not staring at the music. It dances. And actually, all of Gonzalo's concerts have this feature, no matter what his subject is. So I can't wait to do it. But he gets, whether it's 17th century French a couple of years ago or anything English, he gets the ambience out. And this should be a particularly fun one because we'll have friends of Jimi Hendrix there to help us.
Very good. And that's excellent. Well, it's interesting you say, call it a band. I love that because I think Martin Hasselbach, our artistic director, was meeting the consul general from Austria. And he said, yeah, I have this other little band in Austria. And I thought, it's a really interesting way to look at it. And it kind of demystified the process. You were involved in a very interesting creative collaboration, Cynthia, and that was, you were the concert master for the Infernal Comedy featuring John Malkovich, which really blends live theater and a Baroque orchestra together. And so we're doing something kind of interesting here again. And how do you feel about these kinds of collaborations? Is it important to kind of, certainly it's going to attract new audience. It's going to open up ears to be more, receptive to different things. But I'd love to hear your take on how you feel these types of collaborations sort of perpetuate, obviously early music, period music, but other musical art forms too, and really, kind of expose an audience to something unique and different.
Definitely. It definitely does that. That tour was about a 3-week tour all over South America, and we had so much fun with it. And each performance from John Malkovich, on his end, everything was new. I mean, he had to say the same words basically, and Gonzalo's memorized them all. But he breathes life into it, and so then he can be this criminal mind talking about incredible things. And the rest of the orchestra were playing our Mozart and we're playing all of our different things. And it was a really good juxtaposition. So
to clarify for the people that don't remember it, it was a one-man show about a serial killer with a couple of sopranos. That's what she means by the criminal.
Yeah, I was leaving that out, but now that we know what it is,
which is just
incredible.
It's so unlikely. That is, I think, even stranger than combining Handel and Hendrix.
Yes, because we played a little Vivaldi, we played Mozart, we had arias with the singers, and then he came over and he tied his rope around my chair and he talked to me, and I mean, we felt like we were in a play, like we were in somebody's life, and the music was just part of it. So, and the audience, 2,000 people at a time, they really responded. All these different countries. We did it in New York and, all over the States and in Europe. Some of the time I joined his Vienna orchestra then, probably to learn the program and see how it was. But this is the best thing we can do.
So Maury, I did want to kind of have a question or two for you, because we're talking about sort of blending different music genres and different ideas, Handel, Hendrix, theater and Baroque together. So over your career, you've played classical, jazz, rock and roll, and you've performed timpani with the Baroque Orchestra. I'd love to get your thoughts on how these genres of music are similar, maybe how they're dissimilar also, and what connects Baroque to rock and roll.
Well, I would say that in this particular case, as I was telling Gonzalo when I spoke to him the other day, the particular tunes that we're going to do lend themselves beautifully to rock and roll, since rock and roll's chord structures, for the most part, at least back at that time, had those things in common. And playing parts that are lend themselves for improvisation, because, for instance, let me just mention somebody like Thelonious Monk. I mean, when he writes interesting chord changes, Handel and the Baroque period and Bach, and their chord structures were very get technical for a second, diatonic, and there wasn't an awful lot of strange chordal things, unless you were getting even earlier and going to people like Gesualdo. So I think that what we're going to do is very logical. It's logical, it's exciting, and different, because not very many people think of doing something like this. But of course, knowing Gonzalo, it doesn't surprise me, and it delights me unbelievably. This would probably be one of the most exciting moments in my musical career, I have to say. I would,
Well, that's some big praise, particularly in light of the next question I'm going to ask you, because you sat in with the man himself, Jimi Hendrix. You were at a club, we just chatted about this recently, called The Experience in Hollywood. It was a band led by Zoot Money, I believe, who was the keyboardist for Eric Burdon and the Animals. And Jimmy showed up with his guitar, wanted to play, but since he was left-handed, he said, "Come back and bring your guitar" the next night, which he did. And then just tell us the rest of that story. It's a fascinating story.
Well, I was playing, like you mentioned, I was playing with Zoot Money, and we were playing this club. But it was a very popular club at the time, and a lot of people came through there. And as a matter of fact, that's where Janice, some of Janice's people saw me playing. In any case, I was playing there with Zoot, and Jimmy walks in, and Zoot knew him from England, of course, and he looked over and he was very surprised. He didn't know he was coming, and he said, "Oh, Jimmy, there you are." I said, "Did you bring your guitar? You're going to sit in?" And Jimmy said, "Well, I didn't bring it right now, but I'm playing 2 nights at the Whiskey, and I'll bring it tomorrow." And he did. He came in by the next night, and he was playing at the Whiskey with Junior Walker and the All-Stars, which is kind of an R&B band, right? Anyway, so he brought his guitar and got up on stage, and the three of us played at least 2 or 3 tunes of his. I don't remember which tunes they were at this point because it was a pretty long time ago. But in any case, we played, and it was fun, and we had a great time. And he was very nice and kind of a gentle soul, believe it or not, and no ego, and very accessible and friendly. And I talked with him for a brief time after that, and then he just sort of disappeared into the night. And I thought to myself, hey, I thought at one point we were going to do a tune where I could really do my impression of Mitch Mitchell, his drummer. But alas, we didn't get to do that. I pretty much had to play straight up and down kind of R&B kind of backbeats, as you mentioned before, the backbeats. And but it was still lots and lots of fun, and we had a great time.
That's fabulous. Well, we certainly know that Jimmy was very influenced by swinging London in the 60s, which was kind of the place to be. A great deal of music, culture, things were happening. I remember it from my misspent youth, although I was very young when I lived in England, that London was really the place to go to. And then Handel in his day was extremely influenced by the great English poets of the era. So it's sort of a question for everybody. I'll throw it out to all of you is, so how does the time and the era in which you live influence the music that you're performing or creating?
Sure, that's kind of open-ended.
Yeah, it is a little.
I would say that all of my favorite musicians have always been looking forwards and backwards at the same time. I mean, certainly Handel was on the cutting edge in a number of ways, and yet in this concert he's looking backwards to the 17th century for the text, and he is taking the French classic dances and doing something super interesting with them. And Hendrix at the same time, well, nobody had ever heard anything like that. But at the same time, he came from an R&B and blues background. Mm-hmm. I mean, when he solos, if you strip away the layers of distortion and the sort of sonic genius, and all the party tricks, he sticks to the pentatonic scale. Almost inevitably, he is just deeply rooted in the blues, even though to people that heard it at the time, it may as well have come from another planet. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. But...
No, I think it's fascinating, and I like your thinking about, obviously the blues influenced a great deal of the rock and roll that was coming out of the UK at the time. And
certainly all of rock and roll, not just Hendrix. Yes. But Hendrix to an unusual degree, I would say. Yeah.
So there's a kind of a famous story as I was reading about the house that Jimmy found out that Handel lived there. And so he thought, well, that's kind of inspiring. And he ran out to his master's Voice, which is a famous record shop in London, and he picked up a copy of the Messiah. And according to a girlfriend of his at the time, he took it home and put it on the turntable and started jamming with it. And so, wow, he was definitely influenced by Handel. I mean, some people have claimed that there are what they call Handelian riffs can be heard in the rock guitar chords of Hendrix's later work. So I don't know if that's just...
You can see what you want into it.
You can hear what you want.
But certainly that dynamic of hearing something that sounds cool and wanting to join in, and then in a couple of spots decidedly taking over, it's exactly what's going to happen in the second half.
So as long as you don't set anything on fire, we're going to be okay.
No pyrotechnics. No, I also do not play with my teeth, and I can't play anything behind my back.
All
No.
I was kind of hoping for that, actually, myself. I was kind of hoping.
No.
Not gonna happen, huh? Okay.
No. But and there's actually two guitarists on stage. It's not just me, but Kevin Cooper, who will be playing theorbo, the giant lute, most of the evening. Might just switch to an electric guitar as well. So yeah, he might be able to play with his teeth. I can't.
So this is a kind of a crazy question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway because I'm just curious to know what your answer might be to this. And we know that Hendrix was influenced by Handel. There's stories, he heard the Messiah, he knew that Handel lived there, he felt this kind of connection, he wanted to listen to this music, he jammed with it. How do you think the reverse would have gone? How do you think that maybe Handel being influenced by Hendrix? That's a crazy one, I know, but
yeah, that's a crazy one. Does anybody else want to take it before I do?
I'll start it. Because I was listening to Monteverdi Vespers. I've played it a lot, and some of that music is like it's meant to feel like it's their rock music. And then a lot of moments, even in the Messiah, even if it's a religious piece or other pieces of Handel, it's they're jamming, they're playing, they've got huge dynamics, they have trumpets, and that's their version of. That's what I always think. And when we pull it off, so it gets the audience feeling that, just like Jimi Hendrix danced to the Messiah. That's a good story I'm going to remember. So go on, Gonzalo.
Okay. I think that if they were going to find common ground, which is the conceit of our second half piece, it would probably be around pieces that sort of circle the same key, essentially what we in classical music call a ground bass, which certainly most of Hendrix's music is, and what we're going to be playing is a ground bass, a 13-bar ground and an 8-bar ground, to be precise, is what we're going to be playing. And we're also going to be playing a pure Handel ground at the end of the first half. I would think that would be the first area where they might find some common ground, rather than a lot of other music by Handel, where you visit different tonalities, as it were. Right? Hendrix's music tends to not do that. So that's why I chose the work that I did, because it has enough overlap. Where in the in a couple of the movements of the pure Handel, not to mention in the one that we played before the switch at the intermission, there is that sort of like how should I say, recurring music that is easy to build on, in a sense. It invites building on rather than following a roadmap, which has its own kind of charms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know. I love that.
Yes.
In fact, Maury and I were talking earlier, so I'd love to hear his thoughts on this too. And I was asking him, I bet there are a bunch of these folks that are just big fans of Handel that are also big fans of Hendrix, and you shouldn't kind of separate out and think that people consume music. Oh, I just like classical, or I just like rock, or because I think majority of us like a whole bunch of different musical forms. But do you think that's true, or do you think that? I feel like that's probably the majority of the people that will come to this probably like both. But I'd be curious to know what you think.
Well, I think that they would like both, because the idea is, your original question, what would Handel think of Hendrix?
Yes.
Well, I think if you were to strip away the electronics and the effects that Jimmy used, and just took, as Gonzalo said, the ground and the commonality of it. Meaning, in this case, I think that the blues, for instance, is something that is a simple form that allows for a lot of exploration. Even if you take it, as jazz guys would say, as you take it outside, it's still accessible to the average person, because the ground, the basis of it is there. And so when you want to expound on it and go crazy with it, let's say, and take it to extremes, you're still relating something. It's not like you're taking disparate factors of the music and trying to do something with them. There's a commonality there, and that's the most important thing. I think that that's what people that aren't musicians or composers or players or can relate to, and that's, I think that Handel, being the genius that he was, just like a Bach had heard Jimi Hendrix or Corelli or anybody, they would probably identify with it, again, if you strip away the electronics, because that would be something they may not be able to relate to because it's completely out of their language. But I think that that's basically how this will transpire.
So there will be a good portion of our audience at our March 18th concert who are very young. We're going to be hosting over 100 students from the Long Beach Unified School District's migrant program, and probably another 50 to 60 students from their music program. So kind of a question for all of you. These are obviously younger audiences. They don't come in with any kind of, maybe, let's hope, any preconceived notions. And they're going to hear all of this. And so what's the takeaway for these younger, musicians and younger audience to, hear this, and how's that going to develop their interest in Baroque music and perhaps historic informed performance?
Well, a lot of the instrumentalists, a lot of the people, the children that have come in the past play instruments, and they all come and speak to us afterwards and want to look at our violins and cellos and the harpsichord. And, they're just dutifully, they like it, but they're taking their lessons every week, and their parents get them to practice a half hour a day. And I imagine something like this could open up their lives and their minds, because they probably listen to rock music of all genres, but they would definitely know Hendrix. And they could think, oh, it's all the same. You can combine it. You can talk to each other. So I'm very excited to see what they think.
So that's wonderful. I'm also kind of another thing that's just happened too, which seems to suggest that maybe, we have a very good, robust music program in Long Beach. And I know throughout Southern California, I'm struck with how many young people are in orchestras and marching bands and playing musical instruments. And it's fantastic. It's kind of testament to that. The New York Youth Symphony, and you guys know about this, I'm sure, recently received a Grammy Award. And it was the first Grammy ever given to a youth symphony. It was Best Orchestral Performance. So that seems to suggest that young people are either getting really good training, are motivated, or they're getting good mentoring. But that seems to be kind of a seminal moment, in music, that the Grammys decided to give their best orchestral performance to a youth symphony. I'd love to hear your comments on that.
First, it's fantastic that they got that award. And I hope that kids that hear us, that are on a sort of classical music track, sort of, how to say it, get an inkling that there's a lot more out there, and that which is something that I realized rather later in my classical music trajectory, and that you can step outside the box without jeopardizing what you're already doing. Basically, to put it succinctly, most classical musicians are too tied to the page, in my opinion. And one of the best things we can do is step away from the page. And also that America's contribution to music is too important to ignore. And you don't want to get to the place where I realized I was, where I could give a cogent lecture on the musical offering or the art of fugue. But I had a hard time explaining how 12-bar blues went in its specifics. And we fixed that. But I firmly believe that a good musical education nowadays, even if what you want to do is play Beethoven and Mendelssohn and Stravinsky, has to include America's music, and that is jazz and rock and roll. You know, we were talking earlier about what would Handel think? What would Handel think? One of the first things that would just absolutely just knock him over is that the 5-chord and the 4-chord have traded places. And I hope that doesn't get too specific, but you know, that is like the American Revolution in music is that 5 doesn't go to 1, 5 goes to 4, and 4 goes to 1. Upending hundreds of years of music theory, you know, and that sounds absolutely normal worldwide. That is just the sound of modern culture to some degree, and it's sadly unexplored in classical music training, and that's just the beginning, of course. And of course, anybody that comes being curious about, oh, well, they're going to put a little rock and roll next to some classical music. Wow, that sounds interesting. Let me show up for that. That they see just how deep Handel goes.
So Maury, you kind of played in all of these genres of music: jazz, classical, baroque, rock and roll, and I would imagine that, you know, the blues is in your background too there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of those musical forms and their association.
Just recently with the Bach Collegium in San Diego, we did a concert where we did Beethoven's 7th Symphony. And I came away after playing it, and of course, you know, you're looking at the page, obviously, very, very intently. Well, the last movement is like a drum solo. And it is. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's even more so than the 9th Symphony or anything else. It's just crazy. And I thought to myself, it's like the jazz guys back in the 50s and 60s. They would read incredibly difficult parts and then put the music away and take it off the stand, pretty much, and play it, because they knew it. I almost wanted to be able to do that with the last movement. I mean, it's like playing Wipeout, that timpani part. And I'm looking forward to this concert because I'm thinking, again, I get to do this with incredible musicians, and I don't have to be glued to the page. And I get to improvise, but my thinking is different, because my thinking is going to be in a cross between Handel and Hendrix. It's going to be, I'm playing Hendrix, but I'm thinking in context of Handel. It's just going to be a psychological thing, I'm sure. It's not a conscious thing. It's just some kind of, I don't know how to express it other than that. But I think that most people that will hear this will glean some kind of joining, some kind of, some kind of oneness. I think there's going to be that kind of an epiphany for a lot of people, and the young folks. I think that's a fantastic thing. I think it does an incredible justice to education, and you couldn't have better educators, than the people on the stage there performing. I mean, other than what I'm saying, what I'm doing, but that's really the inspirational thing about this whole thing for me.
Well, it definitely sounds like in our conversation, and Cynthia, I want to go back to you for a moment because you said something that struck me, and I think that we're talking about get away from the page, and we know that like jazz. I mean, if you went to a jazz concert and they broke out sheet music, you'd go, "Oh my God, this is going to be terrible," right?
Yeah.
So or a rock and roll band if they got out music stands and. But we expect it with classical music. Yet you said something I think really important that struck me in the time that I've been associated with Musica Angelica and going to the concerts and watching the interplay of the musicians, how you listen to each other, how you connect with each other. You're looking at each other, but you're hearing the playing. There's a connection there that it's happening in jazz and rock and roll and blues and all these other art forms, but it's certainly happening on that Baroque stage as well. I definitely see it and I feel it. It becomes even more apparent if it's a chamber set and it's a smaller group, perhaps. But give me your thoughts about that. You had mentioned that earlier, and that kind of energy when you feel like you're all feeding off each other and you're reacting to each other.
Yeah, that's the main reason I like being a musician. That's one of the main reasons I even was drawn to the Baroque violin, because they're the big symphony jobs and there's great music there, but it's more like many violinists in a row and you're following a conductor. And here, the concertmaster has more freedom, obviously, but every single person has the freedom. So we take our eyes off the page. We make music, we improvise, we feel like we're improvising dynamics, tempo, shapes. Every concert is a little bit different. And it's like a big string quartet. So that's what I love about it. And then this new venture is going to be extremely exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say we certainly have a lot of evidence that rock music can be arranged and played by a symphony orchestra. To me, the example that comes to mind, I think, is Metallica, and was it the Seattle Symphony, and then I listened to that band. Oh, that's just a lot of noise. And then when it became orchestrated, it's like that is a beautiful piece of music. So we know it can go that way. But is the reverse true? Can Baroque music be arranged and played by a rock and roll band? I know, Gonzalo, you're going to have some thoughts about that. I'm just wondering, is that even possible? I mean, can a rock band break out and do a rock version of a Handel composition? Is that possible?
Okay. Yes, if you put enough effort into it, of course. Certainly, there's been plenty of jazzers that work in bits of Baroque music here and there, and can even improvise in that style, which is enviable. But yes, it could happen. I'm not sure how much I think that would be worth it. I think people should play the music that they feel closest to. You should sort of work from the inside out, expand your music, not by being taken outside your wheelhouse, but by expanding your wheelhouse. I'm not sure if that makes
Well, I do remember listening to Switched On Bach. I think I probably listened to that record because it tortured my father a little bit.
Yes. That was okay. So yes, I had that record too, and it introduced a lot of people to just wonderful Bach music. I'll tell you why that leaves me cold now, because by its very nature, that recording was plotted not in real time, right? It was manipulated. It was a creation. Then you press play. So in a sense, as a performance, It is a product, and it was a beautiful, groundbreaking product. And one of the things that I can definitely say about the way my musical brain has worked the last few years is I've been thinking more and more of music as process rather than product.
Sure.
And something that happens in real time. There can be technology involved, but we don't know exactly how it's going to go when we start at the beginning. Maybe it's very tightly scripted, maybe it's not, but it is definitely a process, and the things that I enjoy about it happen as a result of real world interactions of, people and people, people against themselves, against the instruments, all these dynamics. That's what makes it interesting for me.
Well, certainly we've all had this experience of going to see a band or musical group that we like, and we see them live and go, like, God, they sound terrible live, but they're so great on their record. I kind of feel like the reverse is true with the Musica Angelica and the orchestra. Is, to me, there's nothing more beautiful than the live performance, and there's just something very special. I'm certain that I'm preaching to the choir here because, Maury has said he's really excited to be a part of this. And this is something that you all love doing. So talk to me a little bit about that, because you've obviously been in the recording studio, you've all done that work, but I'm going to suggest that you probably feel pretty strongly about performing live, that there's something very unique.
Yeah, what you're talking about can be true of a number of musical situations, and I hope that it's true of Musica Angelica, where there's enough of it is sort of being is up in the air in terms of exactly how we're going to play this piece, even if it's really fairly tightly scripted. That is what the audience gets, is there's some creative element, even if it's certainly not like jazz or other more improvisatory styles or rock and roll, that there's still something. I feel like the tighter your script is, the more you are likely to deviate from it a little bit and see that as a bug, not a feature. Whereas if there's some element of looseness in what you're going to go out and do, it's easier to do something that is perfect in its own way. That has a perfection in the details that you could not have plotted, otherwise you would have failed. Because it is like, otherwise it really is like a gymnastics routine, which is a wonderful thing. I like watching gymnastics where they plotted out every last little bit of it. Now there you go at the Olympics, and you're going to try to give the best version of that. That's wonderful, but you can take that approach to making music, and certainly that's a very prevalent approach in classical music, and I find it not so satisfying anymore.
Yeah, and the beauty of what we do, what Gonzalo's talking about, is the spontaneity, that we allow ourselves to be free. We know on this beat we all are going to be together, but then something happens and we'll be together here. But then we just inspire each other, just the way I've gone to many, many jazz clubs and watched everything, and things keep happening and we play off of each other. And so if you went 5 nights in a row, it should be very different performances, and we as musicians will feel like it was different.
So I don't want to oversell that aspect of it, because it's not jazz, but it's not the Philharmonic either.
Right.
Yeah. There's a certain amount of chance in everything, and including music, and probably more so in music than anything. If you were a physicist, you'd probably expound on that quite a bit better than I can possibly do, but that's the whole idea of both rock and roll and jazz and live performance of classical music of any kind. Chance, there's chance.
And you have to embrace it.
And I'm sorry, what?
And you have to embrace that.
That's right, you do. And I had a group, like I was saying, I had a group for a while called Baker's Brew, and it was all improvisation. And so you didn't know what was going to happen. And somebody would play something, and we would expound on that, and we would create these little compositions that could never be duplicated again. They weren't written. There's no there's no score, anything. And that's what happens with, and what's going to happen with us. We're going to do that. And the thing is, the most important part of it is that we're listening to each other. And it's a language. And that's what I think young people will come away with when they hear something like this. It's a language. They're talking to each other. And whether they're talking in terms of a style, a Handelian style, or they're talking about a Jimi Hendrix style, or they're talking about Thelonious Monk style, or whatever, it's a language. And that's always what I look forward to, are the surprises all the time.
Excellent. So yeah, we'll be talking to each other because you're going to be the only person on the stage, Maury, without one note of written music.
Yeah,
but I'll be thinking in those terms to some degree.
You'll be hearing it. So
I'll be hearing it. That's right.
So look out, huh? That's fascinating. And I was just going to say, my only context of relating to that is experience on stage when somebody drops a line or they go 30 pages ahead and you can't stop, right? You can go, oh my God, we got to stop. You have to keep going, or the lights go out, or crazy things happen. And so improvisation and dealing with the moment, that's really part of the art form. I think it's kind of what you're all describing, how things come up. And unless you have that look of horror on your face, nobody's going to know. Well, it has been a real delight to chat with all of you today. I really do appreciate your time and your all of your input. I think we're going to have a terrific concert. Hopefully we've excited everybody, about coming to the concert. And we'll definitely love to have you join us. We'll have two performances, one in Long Beach on the 18th, and there is the Stratocaster, it looks like. And we'll have a performance, that'll be at 7:30 at the Beverly O'Neill Theater. Tickets are available, musicaangelica.org. And also on March 19th, we'll be at First Congregational Church in the Chateau Chapel. So that electric guitar and that chapel is going to be, I don't know when the last time electric guitar was broken out in the church. So that's going to be something to behold. But we definitely look forward to having you join us. Thanks again. Thanks to Maury Baker, Cynthia Roberts, Gonzalo. It's been a real pleasure. And we'll look forward to seeing you in about a month on stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.